Welcome to Impact, a program highlighting ministries around the world and in our backyard that are moving the needle in God's kingdom. They fight the battle for souls and communities with the love of God, meeting needs as the hands and feet of Jesus. Their impact is seen and felt in both the physical and spiritual realms. Now, let's hear today's episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Impact Program. I'm Michael David, and my guest today is Dr. Dave Keehn. He's the professor and chair of Christian Ministries at Biola University. Dr. Keehn, thank you for being with us today.
It's so good to be with you, and you can just call me Dave. That's what all my students call me.
Okay, I will call you Dave as you've requested. Well, Dave, tell us, how did you become a professor at Biola?
That is a story of God's timing and God's provision. I never intended to be a college professor. I went to Bible college to be a youth pastor. I was very happy being a youth pastor. I actually was a youth pastor for many, many years. However, as I finished Bible college and was working at a large church in the Inland Empire, most of my ministry had to become leadership development because the ministry was growing large and I couldn't pastor all the students, so I needed to focus my attention on training up others to pastor those students, to mentor the students. And so I had a mentor that said to me, Dave, you need to get more training in this. You need to grow in this skill. So I went to Talbot Seminary because I wanted a different perspective of theology than the Bible college I went to, and took a major in a master's in Christian Ministries and leadership. At the end of that journey, I had a professor who I was taking a class with just say, hey, you'd be really good teaching this. Would you come back as an adjunct professor? And I said yes, only because I wanted my money back from Biola. I was very happy being a youth pastor, but I knew we could use some extra money for some needs around the house or vacation. So I accepted that role as an adjunct professor. I enjoyed interacting with the students. I loved hanging out. I kind of looked at it as youth ministry 2.0. Mm-hmm. And so I did full-time youth ministry and part-time professor for 12 years and really was enjoying that rhythm. During that time, we came down to a church in Dana Point where we continued to thrive, and we still live in that area today. And then after 12 years of being an adjunct, Biola came and said, hey, we're looking for like a youth person, a champion to really spearhead our youth ministries and our internships. And they asked if I'd like to go full-time. And at first I said no. I was very content being a pastor. I knew that was my heart. And they said, well, Dave, a good professor is pastoral, that you have a heart for your students, you have an open door policy that students can come in and talk with you about just anything, life, class, marriage, ministry. And that intrigued me. I liked that idea. But then they said, and when your children are old enough, they get free tuition here at Biola. And at that moment, I felt God calling me into a new direction of ministry. And so I pivoted and went full-time professor at Biola and part-time youth pastor at the church I was still at in Dana Point, overseeing a good team. And so I've been now full-time at Biola for 16 years. And so I have many PhD students that seek me out and say, hey, tell me your journey to becoming a professor so that they could follow the same path. And I'm like, I don't know if I could describe it. It's just God's timing, God's place for me. But it really is my sweet spot. I really do love discussing topics of life and God and ministry with students. I love pastoring the students, and I get to still teach in local churches. And I tell my students I want to be what Yoda was to Luke Skywalker. I just want to ask really good questions, say funny things, and just help them grow in their own journey of ministry. So.
Now, you mentioned your children. I understand that years ago you became a father of a baby boy named Adam, and I understand he was a miracle child. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have 3 children. Our daughter is Amy. She lives in Atlanta. She's going to be 32 here next year. Our youngest son we adopted from South Africa. His name is Fundo. He's actually a freshman in college in Hawaii. And then our son Adam was born, and he really was our miracle child. Adam would be about 28 right now, if my math is correct. Maybe 20, I think 28. And my wife, Debbie, after our first child was born, got very, very sick. And to the point where she was on some pretty powerful medication that the doctors said to us, do not get pregnant. Like, do everything you can to prevent it, because if you do conceive, this child will have significant birth defects. And they put the fear of God in us about what could happen. And so we were very careful and focused on Debbie's health, focused on raising our daughter. And after about 3 years, God was starting to heal Debbie's body. The doctor said, hey, if you want to get pregnant, we can reduce this medication for a season. And you can see, and so we conceived very quickly. God was very good to us that Debbie conceived really quickly. At the end of the first trimester, though, Debbie got sick again, and she had to go back on this medication and bed rest. And we were just praying, all right, God, protect Adam, protect our child. And so when he was born full term, he came out blue. And we knew something was wrong because normally when a child comes out, they're crying, they're given to their mother right away. And this was not the case with Adam. They quickly whisked Adam down the hallway. And, I'm trying to decide, do I stay with my wife who is, dealing with certain medical issues, or do I chase my son who's dealing with other medical issues? And my wife made the decision for us, and she said, go find him, go be with him. And so they were working on Adam, and he perked up, started to cry, which is what every dad wants to hear with their newborn child. And so we knew Adam was a gift from the very beginning. Adam was an amazing child. He was very athletic and very, very much the Pied Piper of his friends, and grew into just an incredible man. Not always easy along the way. Had some real struggles with his faith and our relationship, but truly was a follower of Jesus, and actually pursued youth ministry, following in my footsteps. And when he told me that he felt God calling me to be a youth pastor, I said, well, Adam, you can't just do it because your dad makes it look so cool. This is more difficult than you think. And he really felt called, and so he was offered an internship at Mariners Church in Irvine, and he did that and then went on staff. And then from there, took other jobs in ministry. And I'm talking about him, unfortunately, in the past tense because he did pass away 3 years ago to a brain aneurysm. And so we truly have been wrestling with grief in that journey, and we recognize that the time we've been given really started as a miracle from his birth.
And I understand, he was married at the time, and I think he had a child on the way. Is that right? Correct,
yeah. So Adam was married and was 3 weeks away from the birth of his daughter.
Wow.
And so it was tragic on many accounts for our family. His wife, obviously, his daughter's amazing. For his church that he was a youth pastor at, and just a dynamic youth pastor. So many people deeply impacted by this loss.
Now, I understand you started the Adam Keehn Foundation. What type of work do you do there?
Yeah, so Adam, like I said, was a young youth pastor. He was actually thriving. He took his first full-time position, his only full-time position, at a church in Glendora in February of 2020. And then in March, COVID shut the world down. And yet, even though he was in LA County, which is a very strict county about what they could not do, Adam's ministry actually thrived during that season. His ministry grew. He was connecting with students in ways that I was just amazed at watching him, and how he was loving on his students, connecting still with his students, not just over Zoom where he's just a talking head, but really finding ways to interact with students individually. And so as he came out of COVID, his ministry was growing. It was larger. It had seen salvations and baptisms now. And so we want to really think about the next Adam, right? What was it that helped Adam thrive in difficult circumstances? Well, one was that he had really good mentors, myself and the people at Mariners Church, other youth pastors that have been pouring into him. And so what our foundation primarily does is we come alongside brand new youth pastors in their first or second ministry job, and we try to help them overcome whatever challenges might be there, because ministry is a steep learning curve. You may have served as a volunteer or interned at a church, but that first ministry where you're the point leader, there's a lot you're juggling. There's a lot you don't know. There's a lot of expectations put upon you. And so we want to come alongside these young youth pastors, and we provide them free ministry development coaching, which means there are veteran youth pastors that are part of our team that all donate their time. Everybody who serves in our foundation gives their time freely, like myself and my wife. And these veteran youth pastors coach up these young youth pastors to overcome the challenges, to stay in the game so that they don't get so beat down that they're just done with ministry. We want these young youth pastors to be the next church planters and senior pastors and teaching pastors. And so our foundation comes alongside them, mentors them, helps them think more innovatively, right? So you have this challenge. How do you rephrase that challenge? How do you rethink that limitation so you really can see it in a positive or a way that you could build upon it? And then we actually will give them each a small financial grant of about $3,000 to help take that next sustainable step to overcome that challenge. So whatever it might be, we want to come alongside them and help them overcome that challenge. And so that's what we do. We come alongside youth pastors. So right now we're coaching 15 youth pastors across the United States and Canada. Our goal is not to be the biggest. Our goal is to be very intentional with those that God puts in our place, that we can help them sustain themselves in ministry. And we've seen after 1 year, we've just heard great testimonies about helping young guys and gals stay in ministry. And so we are expanding what we're doing now.
Now, what's the website people need to go to get more information about the Adam Keehn Foundation?
Yeah, so it's Adam Keehn, which is spelled Keehn Foundation. So AdamKeehnFoundation.com. And you can go on there and you could request a grant. We do these over the school year. But you can also go on and request a new youth pastor starter kit. In fact, we will send to any ministry in North America a free youth pastor starter kit. You can actually request it for your youth pastor. It doesn't have to be the youth pastor himself or herself reaching out to us. But in this kit, you'll have digital downloads of curriculum that I've written, that others have written. There'll be books that we'll give, some by Sean McDowell, some other books on ministry that we'll just try to help this brand new youth pastor get their library started and kind of show them the next steps.
Dr. Dave Keehn, was your son Adam a typical pastor's kid?
I think typical, yes, in some ways. I think all children have to be on their own journey to faith, that many children go through what I call 2 steps forward and 1 step back moments. And I think the challenge for being a pastor's kid is you just are on display, right? You're doing this in a fishbowl where everybody's watching. And so Adam truly wrestled with the idea of being a pastor's kid. He didn't want his friends to know it, actually. He didn't like that label. And I think part of that is because for him, he was on a journey that he was struggling with some of those decisions. And so I would say in middle school, in high school, he started to take some steps of really questioning, I think, the faith journey that he had been on. The challenge, I think, for me as a pastor was to allow him to be on that journey, right? Because I'm on display as well as the youth pastor. So if the youth pastor's son is struggling in faith, what is that saying about his ministry? And so Debbie and I, my wife and I, truly tried to stay very consistent in how we treated Adam. We continued to show him love and forgiveness, grace and mercy. But we also still said, hey, spiritual values are a part of our family. So even if you're struggling with this, we're going to still go to church together. And Adam at the time was playing very competitive soccer. And so a lot of times he was on a travel team. And he wouldn't be home for Sunday service. And so I made it a point that when he got home late Sunday afternoon, a lot of times that he and I would go find a different church because our church didn't have Sunday night services for a while. And so we would go to a church just to say, look, we're going to be doing this together. And I'm going to model for you what my faith means to me. And we're going to just have conversations. The school that he went to play competitive soccer actually was a Catholic high school down in San Juan. And he, by going to that school, I think it actually showed him like, okay, there's variances of opinion about Jesus, right? He grew up just hearing one side of it from me, from the church that we attended. And so being at a Catholic school, I think pushed him into a system of evaluation of what do I believe? Why do I believe this? And at that school, there were some very godly spiritual counselors. And in fact, their spiritual development team, I really believe, were walking with the Holy Spirit and how they interact with Adam. And I would say during Adam's senior year, he started to have some awakening and some understanding of who Jesus really is. And then I think he went to Biola just because the free tuition, number one, but also because he wanted to stay close to the beach, and he also had a girlfriend at the time in the area, and so he goes to Biola and goes into a dorm and is surrounded by godly young men who lived out what it meant to be Jesus and challenged him in his thinking. And I would say in that season, he had a true coming to Jesus moment where he knew about God, and I think at this moment he surrendered his life to Christ, and it changed everything about his desires. It changed everything about our relationship, and it really brought in reconciliation and peace and joy where there was pain and hardship before.
Now, after all that, going to Biola and having that, time when he surrendered his life to Jesus, when do you think God called him to be a youth pastor, do you think?
I think there was a journey of trying to understand who he was. He came into Biola as an art major, but I knew that was just because he enjoyed photography. He hadn't really thought about a career. And so his freshman year spring, we were sitting in the caf having lunch together, and I that day was hosting a number of youth pastors on campus for a meeting, and the junior high pastor at Mariners Church Irvine, Justin Herman, came up to Adam, and Adam had full sleeves of tattoos, and so did Justin, and so Justin looks at my son and says, "Dude, love your ink. I want you to come work for me this summer." And Adam goes, "Look, Dad, I got a job." And I'm like, "No, Adam, he's talking about an unpaid internship." And yet, in that experience, he served the summer for free, serving at the church, and I think he started to see what ministry could be like on the other side. He had watched it as a kid receiving it, but now he was on the other side of the coin. And then that fall, he started to really wrestle with what his major was going to be. What did he feel called to do? And in that time frame, he basically started to recognize the joy he was having serving at Mariners. And that winter, Christmas break, he went to Chicago over the Christmas break to do street witnessing on the streets of Chicago. And I told him, when he told me about his idea, I'm like, "Adam, there's no one on the streets of Chicago in December. It's -4. Who are you going to share the gospel with?" He goes, "Dad, we will find them." And he did. They went to coffee shops, they worked with churches, and they were able to share the gospel. And he just, through that experience of serving with Mariners Church over the summer and then starting to take some ministry classes that fall and then going to Chicago on that mission trip, he fell in love with the gospel. His understanding of grace, because of the journey that he had been on, was at such a deeper level than I think perhaps my own, who I was raised in the church. I always went to church. I always believed this. I saw the relevancy of Jesus early on. It made sense to me. And so grace was there, but I just saw it as God's goodness. I didn't see it from the point of someone who was pretty broken and lost, like Adam was for a season. And when he understood the forgiveness of Jesus and the reconciliation and the hope that the gospel brings, he was just so sold out for the gospel. And I think that is really what has prompted Debbie and I and his family to start the Adam Keehn Foundation, is to see that legacy for the gospel continue in other young ministry leaders, that we can come alongside them and say, look, Adam had an ordained number of days on this earth, and now, he's thriving in heaven, but there are others that can carry on that mantle, others that can carry on that legacy for the gospel, and that's really what we're trying to come alongside these young ministry leaders and instill in them.
Now, how were you told that Adam had passed away?
So one of my fun things I get to do is I'm the chaplain for Orange County Fire. And so as a chaplain, I pastor a lot of the firefighters, and I'll do ride-alongs with the fire department. And I was riding out with an engine, actually a truck company in San Clemente that day. And Adam hadn't shown up to his church's staff meeting. His wife had gone to work. Adam was supposed to go to a staff meeting that morning at his church, and he never showed up. And so his staff started trying to call around to figure out where Adam was. His wife kind of got the message, ran home to find that he had passed away. And so she called me on the phone and just told me the words that no dad ever wants to hear, that she thought Adam had died. And in all honesty, in that moment, I thought she meant that Adam maybe had a seizure, maybe Adam had the appearance that he had passed, and so I'm like, call 911 and we'll be there soon. And they lived about an hour away. So, you know, what was interesting is we were out of the station, so the truck company actually took me back to the station with lights and sirens to get me back to my car as fast as I could, and then I called my wife and told her something had happened to Adam, and we rushed home together because she was out shopping. And when we got home, I got a second phone call from my daughter-in-law's sister that it truly was the worst nightmare, that Adam truly had passed. And at that point, I went numb. Debbie collapsed, and we had already called some friends that we call our 5-minute friends, and everybody needs community around you, and especially people that will hold you up. And so we had some friends that we knew would drop everything and be right there, and they drove us to where Adam was, and that just began a very long journey with grief that we've been dealing with and writing about and going to counseling over. And so we discovered from the coroner that Adam had passed instantly from a brain aneurysm as a massive brain bleed that no one saw. But we still have questions. Okay, God, why did you allow this? And one of the tattoos that I have received since, I didn't have any tattoos before Adam's passing, but since he had a full sleeve, I have a sleeve of tattoos that I call Adam's arm. And one of my tattoos is actually his handwriting. That simply says, made in the image of God. And as a pastor, I couldn't find an answer for why the suffering, why the pain that our family endured. It wasn't someone's fault. It wasn't someone's mistake. It wasn't, someone's sin, like a drunk driver. Adam didn't overdose. Adam was living righteous and good, and so are we. And so what I've had to come to grips with in my faith is that God created Adam good. That Adam was created in the image of God, but in that goodness was a weak blood vessel in his brain. And, Scripture says that God knows the number of days that we are going to have, and I think in all of our minds, we think, well, that needs to be 80 plus. And the reality is God has gifted us a certain number of days, and that's different for each of us. And so I got that tattoo as really a statement of faith that, all right, God, you made Adam good. You gave Adam to us for a season, and now we're going to steward his death the same way we stewarded his life. And it's been an incredible journey that as we've been places talking about death and grieving. We actually have just written a book called Living in the Shadow of Grief that's being published next March 2026, and it'll be published by D6 Family Ministries in Randall House. And it really details our journey in looking at how we responded to grief and how we're still growing in our grief. But the subtitle of the book is built upon 1 Thessalonians 4:13. The subtitle is Expanding Your Capacity to Grieve with Hope. And that's what we have as followers of Jesus, that we have a solid hope about what the future will be. And so for us, it isn't about going back to something that we had. It isn't going back to what was normal for us. It's about, okay, in our lives, we'll always have grief. Grief, I don't believe, goes away. It's not like, I liken it to a ball that's in a jar. It's not that the ball gets smaller, it's that the jar gets bigger. And so you're able to do more in your life because of the hope you have in Christ and the reality of heaven. But you're still going to have grief. That's why we call it living in the shadow, because even when my wife and I can have a great day together or be worshiping God or having fun wherever we might be, if we really pause and think about it, there's something missing, and that's our son. And yet, in the reality of all of that, we know that we have hope. And so how do you learn to live in that duality of grieving, but also rejoicing and hoping in who God is and what God has done for us? And so that's really the journey of grief that we've been on.
Now, when people are in grief, I mean, should we tell them to stop expressing their pain? Should we tell them to get over it or not worry because their loved one's in heaven? Or should we try to fix them? What would you say to that?
I actually say do none of the above. I say just be with them. The part of this book that we wrote, Living in the Shadow of Grief, is actually written to the church to tell them how to come alongside families that are grieving. Because as Christians, we so quickly want to go to the reality of heaven as that ultimate hope, but we sometimes do that to the disservice of the grieving heart. Proverbs talks about, throwing acid on a wound is someone with a cheerful song to those who are mourning, And so the idea of just telling someone, oh, they're in heaven is actually very painful because it's missing the fact that they've lost something here. Yes, I will see my son again in heaven, but there's so much here on earth that I thought we were going to have that we will not have. Right? We're grieving the what could have been. A young child is never going to know her father except through pictures and stories. A wife is going to be a widow for a season, and that's very difficult. A dad is not going to be able to play with his son and his grandchildren. I mean, there's so much that you look at that has been missed out on. That's pain, that's loss. And so to just quickly pass over that, I think really dishonors the person who grieves and actually adds acid to the problem. It actually wounds the person. And we had people, in all good intentions, I believe, tell us not to cry because Adam's in heaven. And my wife, who's a sweet woman, just wanted to haul off and hit this old lady, because her words were so hurtful in that moment that it wasn't encouraging. And so, grieving takes longer than you're going to want it to be because grief is hard to be around. In other words, if you're willing to step into it with someone who's grieving, be prepared to be very uncomfortable because they're going to be struggling longer than you want them to be. But that's okay because they're working through a process. There would be warning signs, I think, of depression that might set in. And so part of the book addresses that, of things to look for, but grief is going to take longer than you think because the losses are more varied, right? It's not just, I lost a son. His wife didn't just lose a husband. There's multiple layers to each one of these losses, and each one of those losses compounds the grief. And so the best thing you could actually do is when someone is grieving, is say, I'm sorry.
Now, is it possible we can be at peace in the fear of the Lord, even if we never know why we're suffering?
Well, that's the story of Job, right? I mean, we know the story of Job starts in heaven with Satan somehow being allowed to intermingle with the other heavenly beings, and God points out Job's faith, and Satan challenges Job and God, and so God allows Satan to inflict pain and suffering on Job. Job goes through, chapter after chapter of just kind of why God, and having these poetic discussions, and finally he demands to take God to court. And when God shows up in Job 38, God never says anything about the why of suffering. Oh, this happened because Satan challenged your faith. No. God doesn't say anything about that. He simply takes Job on a tour of the universe and says, where were you? Can you even understand my complexities? And the point of Job isn't why we suffer, but who is with you in the suffering. And Job confesses in Job 42, he says, I heard of you, but now I've seen you with my own eyes. In other words, that's the point of the Christian faith, is it doesn't explain suffering. Even if you want to say, well, it's because of sin and the curse and brokenness, that doesn't comfort their grieving heart to know that sin and the brokenness caused this world where babies die without cause, or Adam dies of a brain aneurysm. That might be theologically true, but that's not practically relevant and helpful. But what is practically relevant and helpful is to know that God sees me, God knows my pain and he's walking with me. And that's the journey of fearful trust, that I don't understand it and I won't this side of heaven, but I know I've had God's presence sustaining me in this journey.
And I guess our suffering doesn't have to diminish our faith in God.
No, one of the things we talk about in this book, I actually give a whole chapter in the book to a theology of grief. And one of the key points I point out is the greatness of God and the pain of suffering can coexist at the same time and place. In other words, one does not negate the other. And I often tell people when I've been on this journey that I'm like the man in Matthew 7 that put his faith in the teachings of Jesus, practiced the teachings of Jesus, and when the winds and the wave came upon the house, it beat down the house. And in my naivety before this, I think I just pictured like, well, the house came out fine. But no, if the wind and the waves really were beating it down to the point where it's destroying houses all around it that did not have a solid foundation, well, this building is beat up, but the foundation has stood. And I say that's my journey of faith, that my knowledge of Jesus, the truth of who he is, really has sustained me. But I have other questions I never asked before. I have other wonderments about God that I didn't have before. And so in some ways, man, I'm standing on a foundation, but the house is beat up. And so I feel like I'm also that dad in Mark chapter 9 when his son is possessed by a demon. He goes to the disciples for help, and the disciples can't do anything. And so Jesus shows up, and he says to Jesus, hey, if you can do something, please help. And Jesus says to him, if I can. Because everything is possible for him who believes. And the dad immediately exclaims, I believe, help my unbelief. And Jesus doesn't rebuke him in that position because it's not a duality. It's not being double-minded. He's simply stating, I believe what I know to be true, but I have other questions that I can't figure out right now, like how my son can be possessed. And so in that moment, Jesus doesn't rebuke his faith. He simply heals the son. And so, you know, I think we can be on a journey that includes questions, that includes doubt, that doesn't make us double-minded like it talks about in James. I think there's a place to say, God, I'm struggling. It's the Psalms of Lament, right? We cry out to God with great pain and just trust who God is to help us through that moment.
All right. Well, we're coming to the end of the program. I want to ask one last question, and that's you mentioned the tattoos on your arm, and you've got butterflies and other things as well. I'm wondering, how did the congregation respond to their pastor having tattoos on their arm?
Well, the church I serve at has many people have tattoos, so that wasn't like a new thing, but they were very shocked. We stream our services, and so the people who saw me that morning at church definitely came up and were shocked. The people that are watching us online started texting me right away. But these tattoos are really celebrations of Adam's life. You know, I don't count that like the Old Testament command of Mark's about the dead. This is really about Adam's life. And so everything on
well, the cameras can see you. Go ahead and hold it up. Show the tattoos and the butterflies. Just show at least the butterflies.
Yeah, so the butterfly is a very special one. That becomes our challenge as a trigger to take a moment to pray a prayer of gratitude. Mm-hmm. And so whenever our family sees a butterfly, we just pause. We say thank you to God for Adam. We name something that we remember good about Adam, but we also then name something good that God is doing now, because to help us overcome our depression, gratitude is the solution. And so that became a prompt to pray a prayer of gratitude. And so on the left side of the butterfly is Adam's thumbprint. We actually got that from the morgue. And then on the right side is the monarch butterfly design. And you can see there's a small shadow that is casting. It's the idea of the legacy of Adam, and the gratitude that we have is creating a legacy that's continuing on and impacting others. So
that's fantastic. Give us one more time the website where people can go to get more information about the Adam Keehn Foundation.
Yeah, so it's Adam Keehn, that's spelled Keehn, foundation.com, adamkeehnfoundation.com.
Okay, adamkeehnfoundation.com. Keehn spelled Keehn. Well, Dr. Dave Keehn, Professor and Chair of Christian Ministries at Biola University, thank you for being on the Impact Program today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.